growth, on the continued growth of our economy. As was mentioned, as Kathy pointed out, we've got high wages. We lead the state with respect to average wage amounts per person, and we have very stable employers. We have a very strong economy. But, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we've got a lot of those eggs tied up in just very few baskets. Between Cummins and the automotive suppliers that we have, we're heavily invested in just a couple of sectors of the economy, and we are tied to their continued future. We offer excellent health care. You can get just about any kind of service that you need locally. You don't have to get in your car and drive. That activity is here available to you right now. We have a low crime rate, and I caution when I say that. We divide crime into two statistics. We talk about property crime and what's called violent crime. Violent crime is crime against you, crime against your person, okay? Property crime is crime against your stuff. With respect to violent crime, we are 1/4 the national average, 25%. So if there's 10 in the country, it can be 2.5 events here. So Columbus is a very safe place for you. And personally, I never have any reservations about walking around my neighborhood or walking around various parts of the city at just about any time, of the day or night. It's a little bit different issue, and we'll talk about this a little later, with respect to your stuff. What we call property crime is about 75% higher than the national average. And there's a couple of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with drug use, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But with respect to you, as an individual, this is a pretty safe place to be. We are attractive to immigration. One of the things that we can talk about a little bit later is the diversity that we have in Columbus. We have about 50,000 people in Columbus, just to set the stage. We have about 5,000 of those who were born in Mexico. We've got about 2,500 who were born in India. We've got about 600 who were born in China, 300 from Japan. We've got about 1,500 African Americans, which includes those who were born here and moved here later. But the point is that if you think about it in terms of growth and what it takes to grow, immigration is an important part of that. And I read a book not too long ago where they talked about the fact that there's really only two states of matter. There's growth or decay. There is no flat line. You do not maintain. You either grow or you get smaller. And as we take a look back, say right after World War II, to the communities that were about the size of Columbus, we have outpaced them in almost every way. Our population coming out of World War II was under 20,000, somewhere around 17,000 or so, excuse me. And that put us in the same league with Logansport and Connorsville and Martinsville, and a bunch of communities of whom we are 2 or 3 times, 4 times the size today. And part of that, or a good portion of that, has come from our willingness to embrace immigration. I will tell you, too, the part where I think we have succeeded as a community is that we are prepared to address our challenges. We talked a little bit earlier about some of the diversity challenges that you have with respect to hate groups. We're willing to talk about that. We're willing to identify what our responses are going to be. We also do that in terms of significant projects. Part of what I think is part of Columbus's DNA is a willingness to realize that to solve a certain problem, we may need to adopt a big, hairy, audacious goal, like be the best community resides in the country. We did that a year and a half ago with respect to the railroad. We were told a number of times that there's nothing you can do, that's too much money, you can't make that work. And we didn't pay attention. We went to Indianapolis anyway and came back with a partnership that's going to get that done. We've got a similar challenge with respect to opioids. The heroin issue that we have in this community is very real, and it's going to take a lot of work and a fair amount of money to get that addressed. But we can do that. That's one of the advantages to being in Columbus. We have not only the financial resources and the human resources to address the challenges that have us. And that's what I think makes us, or helps make us, one of the best communities of our size in the country. Nevertheless, we have challenges. As I alluded to a moment ago, our economy is strong. it's not very diversified. So we have worked with the folks at the Economic Development Board to try to target other industries that we might be able to bring to Columbus to diversify that. Of course, when we do that, part of what we run up against really is a two-pronged challenge or two-pronged limitation. One is the low unemployment rate. We cannot go to a company that might bring 200 jobs to our community and give them much assurance that we're going to fill those. If they come with 10 jobs, we can handle that. So it changes a little bit how we prospect, how we engage other communities or other companies. Excuse me. As I said, we're bumping up on limitations for growth. It's not just employment or not just the lack of workers. I think we've got a little bit of a housing concern in Columbus. It relates to a minimization, maybe not the right word, but not adequate inventory. I took 2 economics classes when I was in school, and they talk about supply and demand, right? And what they tell you is that if the price is going up, it's either due to the fact that there's increasing demand or there's decreasing supply. Well, we don't really want demand to go down. So what we have to do as a community is find a way to increase the supply of residential housing. And this can be single-family residential dwellings or apartments. So we've got a couple of programs that we've been working with and working on down at the City Hall to do both of those. There was an annexation 3 or 4 months ago at this point on the northwest corner of town. We referred to it as in the newspaper about Arbor Homes was the name that was given to it. That'll bring 300 residences, single-family dwellings to Columbus. They tell us the absorption rate's 50 a year. So it's going to take 5 or 6 years for that to fill out. Well, that's not fast enough. We've got a number of apartment complexes that have come on board, but again, not enough to really meet our needs. And the problem, again, I don't want to mistake this. We have had increases in the number of workers in Columbus, and we have had increases in the number of single-family residential dwellings. It just hasn't been fast enough. As I said, we've been a victim of our own success. The job growth in the community has outpaced the population growth, and that in turn has outpaced the construction growth of dwellings. As I mentioned earlier, substance abuse is a big problem. I think there was a statistic that was printed in the paper not too long ago that indicated that the emergency room at our hospital had 30 deaths last year due to heroin overdose. The number of admittances related to overdoses and tied either to drugs or suicide was 556. I mean, there's a big difference, in terms of the number of people who pass away and the number of people they're able to save. But my point to you is the 556 or 560, let's call it, that's about 30% higher than 2016, which is about 50% higher than 2015. So you get an impression as to where this line's headed. Okay? And what I'm hearing, the famous phrase from Winston Churchill, the end of the beginning, beginning of the end, all that kind of stuff. I don't think we've seen the high point yet, and it's concerning. So it's good to see that the state of Indiana is going to devote some resources to this, but we can't sit around and wait on it. So we have got some programs which we will begin to talk about a lot more as the year unfolds, that will try to address this. We'll talk about it in terms of prevention, and prevention and education. And some of this stuff's pretty simple. One of the things that we found that was a bit of a insight for me was that among younger people, and I got to be careful, as everybody's younger compared to me, but I'll pick on high schoolers, for example, that there's not much reservation about taking a pill. When I think back when I was in high school and college, I drank, right? I had some alcohol, but it didn't always taste good. Sometimes you had to really work at it to get that stuff down, And it was the same thing with what you might, if you wanted to smoke, if you wanted to do something like that, you had to get past the fact that it didn't taste good, right? Pills have no taste, right? A pill doesn't taste, so there's that one natural barrier that exists is not present with respect to the painkiller type medications, which is where 4 out of 5 addicts start. They abuse the painkiller medications that they find or buy And the problem becomes when they can't find those anymore, or they can't buy them anymore, then they go to the street. And you can buy something that will really turn you around on the street, but you can't dose yourself, or you can't judge the quality of what you purchased. And so that's where we end up back at the emergency room. But the insight with respect to the pill culture that we've created in this country was a paradigm shift for me. And I really hadn't thought about it. And of course, once it gets explained to me, it's, oh, it kind of makes some sense, because I've seen something like that. But the point would be to provide an education program that would let people understand that no, those pills are not without ramifications. You know, you've got to pay attention. Just because they don't have a taste, it doesn't mean that they're not harmful. But we're going to put together some responses. We talk about it, prevention and education. This will be primarily directed towards the younger folks, but will also be for parents and grandparents. If you've got prescription medication in your medicine cabinet, and you've got a kid or a grandkid who just gets into things, well, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your grandkid to clean that out. You only keep what you need. We will also talk about detoxification and rehabilitation, and there's been a lot of discussion about using a portion of the jail. As no pun intended, but we've got a captive population there, and so we've got an opportunity to work with somebody who might be in the right frame of mind to accept what we're offering. Because I don't know a whole lot about addiction. I mean, that's one of the things that I came to this job without. But what I'm told is that you really have to have a person who is in the frame of mind that they want to break this cycle of addiction. And that oftentimes happens when they're in jail, when they sort of hit rock bottom. And right now, we don't have anything to offer. So we've got a willing participant, but we don't have anything to give them. And that's sort of what we're going to try to offer, is some kind of programming where at the time when they're ready to receive it. If you can picture, though, the jail, and it sits there on 2nd Street, and you've got a rather austere front. You walk out the front door. I mean, picture we're going to let this person who's completed their rehabilitation program, we're going to let them walk out the front door to what? Okay? I mean, it's just a real stark world, right? And if we leave it there, if we stop at that point, all the statistics indicate that the recidivism rate will be somewhere around 90%. They will go back to wherever they came from. And so to really break the cycle, we're going to have what we refer to as permanent transitional housing. Now, some people call that a halfway house. It's, if you get into the weeds, it doesn't really translate well. But the problem that we're going to have, and we're going to have to face this as a community, is where do you put that? There was a story in the newspaper not too long ago about an attempt to put one of these places at 17th and Home. And as you can well imagine, the people who live there want no part of it. And I understand that. So part of what our challenge is, part of what the ASAP, Alliance for Substance Abuse Progress, part of the city's challenge, is going to be to find a way to have a small success, a 10 or 12 bed success somewhere, so we can point to that and tell people in other neighborhoods it's not so bad. These folks don't bring bad people with them. These folks behave. They stay there for 18 months or 24 months, and then they get a job and they move on. I mean, that's what we want to be able to do. That's the goal behind that portion of the program. But that'll be a challenge, and I don't want to dismiss it in any way. I wanted to talk a little bit about how the national political climate, may have affected us here in Columbus. I think part of what we've seen, part of what I've seen, is just an increased willingness for people to act out. And I think that's part of what we've seen with respect to some of these hate groups that have, made their appearance in Columbus. What we've tried to do is to make a response that is firm, that is emphatic, that lets people know exactly what we don't like about that. But at the same time, we're trying not to escalate. The last thing that we want to do is create a situation where we wouldn't have to have one. I've read a little bit now, so I had the opportunity. It's kind of interesting once you get invited to do. But I've made 3 addresses at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast that we have at Columbus North High School every year. And part of what you read when you read about him and his life and his beliefs is his a belief with respect to nonviolence. And basically what he's saying is that you define yourself by how you react. So how do we want to define Columbus when we're confronted by these people who we abhor? How do we sort of manage ourselves so that we retain our dignity, if you will? At the same time, we let these people know, where we are with respect to them. It's a bit of a challenge because the emotions become, controlling. And so we've got to find a way to respond and to be blunt with respect to our response, but at the same time, not try to find a way to escalate. I read a speech not too long ago that was given by Mitch Daniels. It's really difficult for me to quote a guy from Purdue, but he wasn't at Purdue at the time. But what he talked about is another concept that I really hadn't heard too much of before. And he talks about what they call the great sort, or the big sort. And what he's referring to is the likelihood of like people to marry like people. My daughter